In the vast expanse of the galaxy, humanity was nothing more than a fleeting thought to the other sentient species. Yet, in the early days of intergalactic exploration, humans had been viewed with a kind of perverse curiosity, a species too weak to be a threat, but one whose persistence in the face of adversity would make them memorable. The alien species that controlled the galactic stage, the Zir, were a fierce race of conquerors. They had seen empires rise and fall, and they had seen humans on the fringes, small, stubborn, and defenseless. They laughed at humanity's attempts to establish colonies on distant planets. The Zir's empire was immense, stretching across hundreds of star systems, and they believed that human ambition would eventually burn out, like all the others before it. But humanity had a way of defying expectations. That was until the invasion came. It began like many others, an irresistible force sweeping through human colonies, obliterating cities, slaughtering civilians, and enslaving the survivors. The Zir didn't bother with subtlety. The humans, in their ignorance, had placed themselves in the path of the inevitable. Their worlds fell one by one, their citizens rounded up like livestock, and any resistance crushed mercilessly. The Zir had been so sure of their victory, so confident that humanity would be reduced to mere footnotes in their history. They made an example of the human race. The first wave of enslavement was brutal. Humans were torn from their homes, forced into labor camps, stripped of their names, their identities, their will to fight. Those who survived the long years in the mines or under the whips of their Zir overlords had one thing in common: they lost the spark that had once made them human. They were broken. But the Zir underestimated one thing: humanity's ability to adapt. In the quietest of moments, deep in the cold, stone walls of Zir prisons, sparks began to ignite. The first true revolt came not from the mightiest soldiers or the fiercest warriors, but from a simple man, a former colonist. A mechanic who had once fixed starships on a forgotten world, now a broken prisoner, but one who had not lost the ability to dream. He was the first to fight back, slowly, quietly, at first. He found ways to sabotage the oppressive machinery of the Zir, corrupting their tools of domination, and for a time, making the prison a dangerous place for those who would try to keep humanity down. His resistance grew, and with it, the whispers of revolt spread from one planet to another. A small network of humans began to organize. The Zir laughed, thinking these minor uprisings would burn themselves out. But it wasn't the size of the revolt that worried them, it was the ferocity and ingenuity behind it. Humans, broken as they were, had something the Zir could not understand, a tenacity that could not be extinguished. On the planet Altharis, a mining world known for its valuable resources, a strike was organized. What began as a mere handful of survivors had, within days, turned into a growing movement. These humans, once enslaved and deprived of hope, now fought back with desperation, and that desperation gave them power. The Zir responded with their usual brutality, sending armies to quell the uprising. What they didn't account for, however, was how the human spirit would rise from the ashes. The Zir had underestimated the deep well of rage and revenge that lay dormant within the human psyche, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Under the command of a brilliant leader, once a high-ranking officer in the human military, now a symbol of the oppressed, humanity's resistance began to take shape. With every battle, with every victory, the name human became something to be feared across the galaxy. The Zir realized too late that they had made a grave mistake. The humans they had once laughed at had become the hunters. The first major victory came at the Battle of Altharis, a clash that would forever change the course of the war. The humans, using their resourcefulness and unyielding will, managed to defeat the Zir's forces, destroying their superior technology with simple yet effective guerrilla tactics. The Zir were caught off guard, their arrogance shattered by the resolve of those they had once enslaved. The survivors of Altharis, empowered by their success, began spreading the message: humans would not be erased. The fear spread quickly, but it wasn't just fear of the humans' ability to fight back, it was the terror of something far worse. The humans were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their very identity, and once they reclaimed it, they would take their revenge. The Zir Empire began to tremble as the humans' name became synonymous with rebellion, with a relentless desire to be free. The war was far from over, but the tide had begun to turn. The Zir had enslaved them, hunted them, and tried to erase them from history. Now, they would come to understand that the true terror was the name they had sought to forget, *human*. The Zir had never expected the uprising to spread so rapidly. The first revolts had been contained, crushed swiftly under the weight of their superior forces. But what they hadn't counted on was the evolution of humanity's resistance. Where once there had been scattered, desperate acts of defiance, now there was something more, a growing, organized rebellion. It was no longer just about survival. It was about taking back what had been stolen, about returning the pain tenfold. Across multiple planets, human insurgents coordinated their strikes with precision. Once they had tasted victory, once they had seen what was possible, there was no turning back. The former prisoners, those who had endured unimaginable suffering, became the leaders of this movement. They understood the methods of the Zir better than anyone. They knew where the cracks in the empire lay, and they exploited them. In the heart of the galaxy, the Zir leadership began to panic. Their once unquestioned dominance was beginning to crumble. The Zir had underestimated the humans' ability to learn, adapt, and ultimately outmaneuver them. With each new planet they liberated, the human resistance grew bolder, more determined. The Zir were no longer the conquerors, they were the hunted. General Krytok, the Zir's most feared warlord, had been tasked with crushing the human rebellion once and for all. He was known across the galaxy for his ruthlessness, and his victories were legendary. He had personally overseen the destruction of dozens of human colonies, leaving nothing behind but charred husks and the hollow whispers of the dead. But now, as the resistance grew in strength, even Krytok's iron grip began to falter. "Where is the victory we were promised?" Krytok snarled as he looked over reports from his generals. The uprisings had become more frequent, more coordinated. No longer were they isolated incidents, they were full-scale insurrections. The humans, the insignificant, frail species, were becoming a genuine threat. Krytok's eyes narrowed as he studied the faces of the humans leading these insurgencies. Each one of them had once been a prisoner, broken, beaten, and enslaved. But now, they had become symbols of hope and vengeance, their names whispered with reverence and fear across the galaxy. The humans had taken to calling their movement the Reclamation, and their emblem was a symbol of a burning sun, representing both their resilience and their fury. The human leader who had taken the most prominence in these uprisings was Captain Lyra Anders. A former military officer, she had been captured during a failed defensive campaign against the Zir's first wave of invasion. She had been imprisoned, tortured, and nearly broken, except she had never lost the spark within her. She was clever, resourceful, and relentless. During her captivity, she had learned the ways of the Zir, studied their technologies, and bided her time. Now, she commanded an army of freedom fighters, her tactics as unorthodox as they were effective. No one knew how she had survived the horrors of the Zir's prison camps, but everyone knew that her name was a symbol of rebellion. Captain Anders' first victory had been small, a sabotage mission against a Zir supply depot, but it had sent ripples throughout the galaxy. Her forces had struck in the dead of night, using the same stealthy guerrilla tactics that the Zir had used to suppress humanity. They crippled one of the Zir's most important supply lines, leaving thousands of their soldiers stranded and hungry. It was a humiliating blow, and it gave the human resistance hope that they could indeed fight back. From there, Anders' reputation grew. With each victory, the human cause became more than a rebellion, it became a movement. Every freed prisoner, every survivor of Zir brutality, flocked to her banner. Human soldiers, once scattered and disorganized, now fought under a single banner with one singular goal, to reclaim their future and exact retribution on their oppressors. Meanwhile, in the Zir capital, the High Council convened in a state of emergency. The humans were not just resisting, they were systematically dismantling the Zir's empire from within. Krytok had reported back, his face a mask of fury. The Zir were losing ground at an alarming rate. "The humans have learned too much," Krytok growled. "We cannot allow this to continue." One of the council members, a cold-eyed diplomat named Drelik, leaned forward, his voice like ice. Perhaps it is time we consider more drastic measures. We cannot allow this rebellion to spread any further. If we do, the humans will be our undoing. The council debated late into the night, but it became clear that the Zir's response would be one of overwhelming force. The destruction of human homeworlds, the final suppression of their rebellion, would be achieved by any means necessary. They would not allow a species as insignificant as humanity to challenge their supremacy. However, deep within the heart of the human rebellion, Captain Lyra Anders and her commanders were already making plans of their own. The Zir would soon realize that this was not just a fight for freedom, it was a war for survival. The humans' resolve was unwavering. Every victory, every step they took forward, was another step towards reclaiming what had been stolen. The Zir would soon understand that humanity's fury was not something to be feared, it was something they could no longer contain. And with each passing day, the name human grew in terror across the galaxy. The Zir High Council had spoken. They had determined that the only way to end the human rebellion was to make an example of them. The plan was simple but brutal: the eradication of humanity's homeworlds, the very planets that had sparked the initial resistance. The Zir would turn the heart of humanity's civilization into ashes, hoping to erase every trace of the species that had so quickly become their greatest threat. The ultimate weapon in their arsenal, the Annihilator Beam, was prepared, a weapon capable of destroying entire planets with a single strike. The Council was confident that this would crush the human spirit once and for all. After all, how could a species survive the destruction of its very cradle? How could a species rise again after seeing its homeworlds reduced to nothing? But what they didn't understand was that humanity was not defined by its homeworlds. Humanity's strength had never come from its planets, its cities, or its grand empires. It came from something far deeper, something far more dangerous, a relentless will to survive, to fight, and to rebuild. And it was that unyielding spirit that the Zir had underestimated. In the cold, dark reaches of the galaxy, the human resistance was making its next move. Lyra Anders knew that the Zir were preparing their ultimate weapon. She had intercepted their communications and understood the gravity of their intentions. Her first instinct was to retreat, to find a safe place for the human refugees, but Lyra's heart burned with fury. There would be no retreat. There would be no hiding. If the Zir sought to destroy humanity's homeworlds, she would make them pay for every life lost. The humans' response was swift. Lyra, now revered as a tactical genius, knew that their greatest strength was the element of surprise. The Zir had grown complacent, believing that they had already won, that they had broken humanity. It was the perfect time to strike. For the first time in history, humans were about to engage in a full-scale assault on the Zir's capital, the very heart of the empire that had enslaved and tortured them. The operation was called Inferno, and its success would mark the turning point in the war. The plan was as bold as it was dangerous. A fleet of human ships, gathered from the remains of the old colonies and newly liberated worlds, would infiltrate Zir space under the cover of darkness. They would attack Zir supply lines, cut off reinforcements, and create chaos at the core of the Zir's power. Meanwhile, a small elite team, led by Lyra herself, would board the Zir flagship, the Dread Sovereign, and destroy the Annihilator Beam before it could be used. As Lyra stood in the command center of her flagship, she stared at the holographic map of the galaxy, her mind racing with the enormity of their mission. This was the moment when everything would change. Failure would mean the end of humanity, but success would mean something more. It would prove that the Zir's tyranny could be defeated, that their stranglehold on the galaxy could be broken. The fleet assembled, and with a single command, the operation began. The first wave of human ships, equipped with advanced stealth technology that had been developed in the shadows of the Resistance, moved silently through Zir space. The Zir, arrogant and confident in their superiority, failed to detect the threat until it was too late. Human warships, small but deadly, rained down chaos on Zir supply depots and communication hubs, crippling the Empire's ability to respond. As the Zir scrambled to defend themselves, Lyra and her team made their move. They boarded the Dread Sovereign, using a combination of daring tactics and guerrilla warfare to fight their way through the ship's defenses. The Zir soldiers were formidable, but the humans were faster, more resourceful, and driven by a single purpose: to destroy the weapon that threatened their entire species. In the heart of the Dread Sovereign, Lyra and her team reached the control room where the Annihilator beam was housed. It was an imposing structure, the culmination of years of Zir engineering, a weapon that could wipe out entire worlds with a single burst of energy. But Lyra was undeterred. She knew that this was not just a fight for survival, it was a fight for their future. "Prepare to disable the weapon," Lyra ordered, her voice calm but filled with the weight of the moment. "This is our time." Her team worked swiftly, bypassing Zir security systems and planting explosives around the control panels. As the countdown began, Lyra could hear the Zir soldiers closing in. They would come for her and her team, but it no longer mattered. Humanity had reached the point of no return. With a final, decisive push, Lyra activated the detonators, and the Annihilator beam erupted in a spectacular explosion. The shockwave reverberated through the ship, shaking it to its core. The Zir's weapon of mass destruction was no more. But the victory came at a cost. The Dread Sovereign was heavily damaged, and Lyra's team was forced to fight their way back to their escape pods. As they made their way through the wreckage, Lyra felt the weight of their success. The Annihilator beam was destroyed, but the Zir would not take this defeat lightly. The human fleet, having completed its strike on the supply lines, pulled back, victorious for now. But as Lyra looked out over the battlefield, she knew this was only the beginning. The Zir would retaliate. They would try to crush humanity once more. But in the wake of their defeat, the message was clear: humanity had risen from the ashes, and they would never be erased again. The fear that the Zir had once tried to instill in humanity was now their own. For the first time in centuries, the Zir knew true terror. The name, human, had become a symbol of defiance, a name that would never be forgotten. In the aftermath of the destruction of the Annihilator beam, the galaxy was plunged into a new era of uncertainty. The Zir, though reeling from the loss, had not given up on their ultimate goal, the complete eradication of humanity. The Dread Sovereign was lost, but the Zir High Command had other weapons at their disposal. The Reclamation, humanity's movement of defiance, had won a monumental victory, but their triumph had made them the target of an even greater wrath. As the Resistance celebrated their hard-won victory, Lyra Anders was already planning the next phase of their rebellion. The Zir were not an empire that could be defeated with one strike. They were relentless, and their thirst for vengeance knew no bounds. But humanity had something the Zir could not comprehend: unity, resilience, and an unyielding will to fight for their future. The spark of defiance that had been ignited was not something that could be extinguished by fear or fire. Lyra stood in the war room aboard the Rising Dawn, a flagship of the human fleet. Around her, her most trusted commanders, veterans of countless battles, watched her with a mix of determination and exhaustion. The victories they had secured were not without cost, but they had proven one thing: humanity could stand toe-to-toe with the Zir, and with enough time, they would break the Conqueror's hold on the galaxy. "We have one chance to strike before they regroup," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. "The Zir won't rest until we're wiped out. We need to hit them where it hurts, at their heart." The room fell silent as Lyra outlined her plan. They would attack the Zir's most strategic world, Zyras, the central hub of their military operations, their manufacturing plants, and the heart of their war machine. If humanity could cripple Zyras, they would deal a crushing blow to the Zir's ability to wage war, and perhaps, change the course of the entire conflict. But it wouldn't be easy. Zyras was protected by the most advanced defense systems in the galaxy, an impenetrable fortress guarded by thousands of ships and an array of lethal weapons. To succeed, Lyra's team would need to use every trick they had learned in the years since the rebellion began. Stealth, surprise, and cunning would be their greatest allies. The mission was set in motion. The human fleet moved into position, hidden behind the moon of a nearby gas giant, and began their stealth assault on Zyras. Lyra's team, once again, would be at the forefront. Their primary objective was to infiltrate the planet's heavily fortified capital, breach the Zir military stronghold, and destroy the central command hub that controlled the entire Zir war effort. As the fleet prepared for battle, the Zir High Command was already making plans of its own. General Krytok, enraged by the humiliation of the Annihilator Beam's destruction, had been replaced by a new, even more ruthless commander, Admiral the Rick, a cold and calculating strategist known for his cruelty and cunning. The Rick had one goal: annihilate the human threat once and for all. The Zir had learned from their mistakes. Their response was swift and brutal. They would not just defend Zyras, they would turn it into an impenetrable fortress. The planet was being reinforced with legions of elite soldiers, advanced weaponry, and a new class of warship, the Imperial Vanguard, built for the express purpose of crushing any resistance. But the humans had one advantage that the Zir could not predict: their ability to adapt. Lyra knew that while the Zir were powerful, they were also overconfident, and it was that very arrogance that would be their undoing. As the human fleet approached Zyras, Lyra's team, a small but elite force, infiltrated the planet's atmosphere undetected. Using a combination of old Earth technology and advanced Zir tech they had captured in previous raids, they managed to slip past the outer defenses, landing deep in the planet's wilderness. From there, they would have to fight their way through Zir patrols, avoiding detection at all costs. The mission was fraught with peril. Every step they took was a gamble, but Lyra knew that if they failed, humanity would lose its chance at victory. The planet's defenses would crush them, and the Zir would hunt down every last human who dared to stand against them. Meanwhile, the battle in space raged on. The human fleet clashed with the Zir warships in a fierce battle above Zyras, creating a distraction that allowed Lyra's team to move undetected. Human fighters swarmed the skies, evading Zir fire and striking from the shadows, while the Zir retaliated with their formidable firepower. Explosions rocked the heavens as the battle reached a fever pitch. On the surface, Lyra and her team fought with everything they had. They faced wave after wave of Zir soldiers, their advanced weapons and overwhelming numbers pressing in from all sides. But the human spirit, fueled by revenge and a desire to protect their future, kept them fighting. Every battle they won brought them closer to their goal: the destruction of the Zir military command. As Lyra's team reached the outskirts of the Zir command center, the air was thick with tension. They were close, so close they could almost taste victory. But they were also dangerously close to being discovered. Their movements became more deliberate, each step calculated to avoid detection. They knew that the moment the Zir realized they had breached the heart of their fortress, there would be no turning back. Lyra paused for a moment, looking at her team. Their faces were grim, but their eyes burned with the same fire that had fueled them from the beginning of the war. The fear that had once ruled them had been replaced with something much stronger: resolve. "Let's finish this," Lyra said, and with that, they moved forward, ready to strike the final blow to the Zir Empire. The storm was gathering. The Zir had no idea what was coming. The humans would soon remind them that they were not the only ones who knew how to fight for survival. And this time, the Zir would learn that their name, human, would no longer be feared; it would be the name that would destroy them. The command center of the Zir was a sprawling, labyrinthine structure, heavily guarded and protected by some of the most advanced security systems in the galaxy. It stood as the symbol of their unchallenged dominion over countless worlds. The very walls of the fortress were designed to be impregnable, meant to withstand the fiercest assaults and the most sophisticated attacks. Yet, humanity was about to prove that no fortress was too strong to be torn down. Lyra Anders and her elite team moved swiftly through the shadowed corridors of the Zir stronghold, their footsteps silent on the polished metal floors. The scent of cold steel and the faint hum of Zir technology filled the air, but the humans paid it no mind. They were focused, every member of the team knowing that this was the moment they had been preparing for. They had infiltrated the planet's outer defenses with incredible precision, evading detection by using stealth technology and the element of surprise. The human fleet above Zyras, engaged in a ferocious battle with the Zir's warships, kept the bulk of the enemy's forces distracted. The time to strike was now. But time was not on their side. Lyra knew that the longer they stayed on Zyras, the more likely it was that the Zir would realize something was wrong. They had to get to the heart of the fortress, disable the central command hub, and leave before the enemy could respond in force. The team fought through waves of Zir soldiers, their advanced energy weapons cutting through the air, but the humans were relentless. Their training and their shared drive to protect their people gave them an edge that no Zir soldier could match. The enemy, for all their strength and firepower, lacked the will to fight for something greater than themselves. As they neared the central core of the command center, Lyra's thoughts were laser-focused. Every battle, every sacrifice, had led to this moment. This was not just a mission, it was a statement. Humanity would never be subjugated again. No matter the cost, they would reclaim their freedom, and they would make sure the Zir knew that their empire was not as invincible as they thought. They entered the heart of the Zir fortress, a vast chamber filled with rows upon rows of control panels, holographic displays, and communication arrays. It was here that the Zir High Command oversaw the operations of their entire empire, where decisions were made that affected the lives of billions. The team moved quickly, planting explosives on key systems and sabotaging the data hubs that controlled the flow of information to Zir forces across the galaxy. As Lyra moved to the main control console, she paused for a moment, surveying the chaos they had caused. Their strike had been swift, but now came the most dangerous part of the mission, getting out. "Prepare for extraction," she ordered. "We have what we need. Let's finish this." But as the words left her mouth, the sound of alarms rang through the complex. The Zir had discovered their breach. The corridors were suddenly filled with the sound of pounding footsteps, the unmistakable clank of Zir soldiers rushing to intercept them. Lyra's heart raced. They had to act fast. "Split up," she commanded. "We'll fight our way out. Keep moving. Don't stop." The team split into smaller groups, each tasked with securing a different exit and fighting through the approaching Zir forces. Lyra and her second-in-command, Sergeant Corin, made their way toward the main entrance, where they could rendezvous with the extraction team. The hallways were filled with Zir soldiers now, but the humans fought with a ferocity the Zir couldn't match. Corin took out 2 soldiers with quick, efficient shots from his pulse rifle, while Lyra led the way, her mind sharp as a knife. Each corner they turned brought them closer to the extraction point, but the Zir forces were relentless, and their numbers were growing. "Almost there," Lyra shouted, her voice carrying through the chaos. Suddenly, the door at the end of the hall exploded outward, and a group of elite Zir shock troopers emerged, heavily armored and armed with high-powered weaponry. The humans had no choice but to engage them head-on. The battle that followed was fierce. Lyra and Corin fought side by side, their movements synchronized, as they held the line against the oncoming Zir soldiers. The shock troopers were powerful, but humanity's experience in guerrilla warfare, their ability to adapt and strike from unexpected angles, gave them the edge. As the last of the shock troopers fell, Lyra and Corin broke through the final door, emerging into the open air of Zyra's surface. The human extraction team was waiting, their stealth ships hovering just out of sight, ready to whisk them away from the planet. But as they sprinted toward their escape, a new danger loomed overhead. The sky darkened, and a massive shadow blotted out the stars above. The Imperial Vanguard, the Zir's new warship, descended from the clouds, its massive guns aimed directly at the fleeing humans. "We've got company," Corin muttered under his breath. Lyra's mind raced. If they didn't get off this planet now, the Vanguard would obliterate them. She looked at the extraction team's leader, a sharp-eyed pilot named Zane. "Take us up, now," she shouted. The extraction ships powered up, their engines roaring to life as they soared into the air. The Imperial Vanguard fired a barrage of energy blasts, but the human ships weaved and dodged, using every ounce of speed and maneuverability to avoid the Zir's fire. The battle was far from over, but they had achieved their objective. The Zir's central command was crippled, their control over the galaxy severely weakened. The Resistance had delivered a blow to the Zir Empire that would echo across the stars for years to come. As the ships made their way into the safety of space, Lyra looked down at the burning world below. Zyras would never be the same again. And neither would the galaxy. Humanity had struck at the heart of the Zir, and the message was clear: the humans were not to be underestimated. They had proven they could bring the fight to the very gates of the Empire, and the Zir were no longer the ones in control. The storm was building. The Zir had no idea what was coming next. But Lyra and her people were ready. And this time, when they struck, they would make sure the galaxy knew that the name human was one that would haunt the Zir for generations to come. The universe had been forever changed. Lyra Anders and her team had crippled the Zir's most powerful stronghold, dealt a blow to their military infrastructure, and ignited a spark that was quickly becoming a wildfire. The Reclamation, humanity's resistance, was no longer just a group of rebels, it was a movement, a symbol of defiance that had spread like lightning through the galaxy. The Zir High Command, now fractured and vulnerable, scrambled to regroup. Their control over the galaxy was slipping away, and their once unshakable confidence was beginning to waver. The devastation of Zyras was still fresh, and yet the Zir were already plotting their next move. But the fear they had once sought to instill in humanity now hung over them like a storm cloud, and every decision they made was fraught with uncertainty. In the aftermath of the assault, humanity's leaders gathered for the first time since the destruction of Earth. On a remote station in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, the Reclamation held its council. Lyra Anders stood before them, her face determined but tired. The scars of the war were etched into every line of her face, but her resolve was unshaken. The victory on Zyras had been monumental, but it was only a beginning. The Zir would not go down without a fight. Lyra knew they had to press forward while they still had momentum. The road ahead would be perilous, but humanity was no longer afraid. They had tasted the sweetness of victory, and they would not stop until the Zir Empire was nothing but a shadow of its former self. "We've hit them where it hurts," Lyra began, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of the countless lives lost along the way. "But the Zir won't fall easily. They'll retaliate. We need to be ready for whatever they throw at us next." Her words were met with murmurs of agreement, but there was no fear in their voices. The humans who had gathered here were veterans of the war, survivors who had seen the worst of what the Zir had to offer. They were no longer afraid. They were angry. And in that anger, they found strength. "We have one advantage," Lyra continued. "We know the Zir. We've learned their strategies, their weaknesses. They've underestimated us at every turn. And we'll use that to our advantage. We need to take the fight to their doorstep, strike at their capital and break their will to fight." The council fell silent. The idea was radical, dangerous, but the spark of hope that had been kindled in their hearts after Zyras refused to die. The time had come to take the final step, to push through the darkness and into the light of a new future for humanity. One by one, the leaders nodded. The plan was set. They would target the Zir capital, the heart of their empire, and end the war once and for all. Meanwhile, the Zir High Command had convened in a last-ditch effort to quell the rebellion. Admiral Tharic, their new commander, stood at the head of a war council, his face a mask of fury and cold calculation. The destruction of Zyras had been a blow to their pride, but it had also exposed the vulnerability in their empire, vulnerability that could be exploited if not corrected. Tharic knew what had to be done. He would not allow humanity to destroy the Zir Empire. The humans had already proven their resilience, but they were playing a dangerous game. The Zir were about to turn the tables. "The humans think they've won," Tharic said, his voice low and menacing. "But they are fools. We will destroy their remaining forces, cripple their leadership, and wipe out their hope. This rebellion will be crushed." The Zir fleet was already mobilizing for a counteroffensive. They would strike at humanity's heart, wiping out their remaining strongholds and sending a clear message: defy the Zir, and you will be erased. The Zir were no longer interested in negotiation, they were determined to annihilate the human threat once and for all. But in the far reaches of space, the human fleet was already preparing its response. Lyra Anders, now recognized as humanity's greatest military mind, was putting the final touches on the most audacious operation yet. The time had come to make the Zir fear humanity's name in a way they never had before. Lyra knew that the Zir had underestimated humanity's ability to strike back, to rise from the ashes of defeat. And now, the Phoenix would take flight. The human fleet, having gathered its forces and rallied countless worlds to its cause, readied itself for the assault on the Zir capital. Lyra, leading the charge, stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Rising Dawn, looking out into the vast expanse of space. It was a final test, a fight that would determine whether humanity would live or die, whether they would remain free or be crushed under the weight of Zir tyranny. "Are we ready?" Lyra asked, her voice calm but unwavering. "Yes, ma'am," replied her second-in-command, Corin, his voice steady with the confidence born from years of battle. "Then let's make them remember why they feared us in the first place." The fleet surged forward, a wave of humanity's resolve crashing toward the heart of the Zir Empire. The Reclamation was no longer just a rebellion, it was a force that would reshape the galaxy. As the human fleet entered the core of Zir space, a voice rang out across the stars. It was Lyra, broadcasting to every corner of the galaxy. "Zir Empire, hear this, we will no longer hide in the shadows. We will no longer cower in fear. The name human is no longer a whisper in the dark. We are the storm. We are the Phoenix. And we are coming to take back what is ours." The message rippled through the galaxy, echoing through the hearts of every human who had been oppressed, every world that had suffered under the Zir's heel. And though the Zir still thought themselves mighty, they would soon learn the full weight of the truth: the human spirit could not be broken. And no empire, no matter how powerful, could stand in the way of humanity's rise. The final battle was approaching. And this time, there would be no retreat. There would be no mercy. The Zir would learn what it meant to face the wrath of a species that refused to be erased. Humanity would fight until the very end, and they would make sure their name, *human*, was forever feared in the galaxy. The Phoenix had risen. The universe stood on the precipice of a new era. Humanity, once thought to be insignificant in the grand expanse of the cosmos, had risen from the ashes of its past to become the fiercest force the galaxy had ever known. The Zir, a mighty empire that had terrorized countless worlds, had underestimated the spirit of a species driven by the will to survive and the desire to reclaim what was theirs. Lyra Anders stood at the helm of the Rising Dawn, gazing out at the heart of Zir space. Beyond the swirling clouds of interstellar dust and the looming shadows of distant stars, the Zir capital lay just ahead. The time for stealth and subtlety had passed. This would be a battle like no other, a fight that would determine the fate of humanity, the fate of the galaxy. "Prepare for entry," Lyra ordered, her voice firm and resolute. "This is it. No turning back now." Her crew, battle-hardened and united by a common cause, nodded in silent agreement. They had come so far, each mission, each victory, had led them to this moment. The war had taken its toll, but it had also forged them into something greater than they had been before. The fear that once clouded their judgment was gone, replaced by a burning conviction. Humanity would no longer be slaves. Humanity would no longer be hunted. Humanity would not be erased. The fleet, a collection of warships, fighters, and transports, followed Lyra's flagship in a tight formation, their engines humming as they cut through space with terrifying speed. The Imperial Vanguard, the Zir's greatest weapon, was waiting for them. But Lyra knew that humanity's strength lay not in firepower alone, but in their ability to fight with everything they had, to outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast their enemies. "All ships, prepare for the final assault," Lyra broadcasted across the fleet. "This is our moment. For Earth. For the future. For every human that has ever fought, bled, or died for freedom. We will make them fear our name." The Zir, as expected, had not been idle. Their defenses were formidable, their warships lining the skies above their capital, their ground forces entrenched in every city and stronghold. But they had made one fatal mistake: they had forgotten that humanity would never be the easy target they had assumed. The human fleet surged forward, exchanging fire with the Zir ships as they neared the planet's atmosphere. The Imperial vanguard loomed large above them, its weapons trained on the advancing forces. But Lyra had anticipated this. The Zir had poured all their resources into this warship, believing it to be their final answer. But no ship, no matter how advanced, could stop the unyielding tide of human determination. "We need to take out the vanguard now," Lyra said, her eyes never leaving the screen as Zir fire lit up the darkness of space. "Send in the stealth squadron. They'll create a distraction. We'll hit them hard from behind." Her plan was simple but effective. The human fleet would keep the Zir engaged in a brutal space battle, drawing their fire and attention, while a smaller, elite squadron of human fighters, pilots who had once been scattered across the stars, would slip through the chaos and strike at the heart of the vanguard. They would disable its weapons, cripple its shields, and create an opening for the rest of the fleet to follow. As the battle raged, Lyra's fleet performed with precision. They danced around the Zir's fire, taking hits but never faltering. Their ships, though less advanced, were nimble, their crews experienced, and their resolve unshakable. But the vanguard was a force to be reckoned with. It was massive, its energy weapons tearing through the fabric of space with incredible force. The humans were fighting against an empire that had thrown everything into this final confrontation. But they were fighting for something far greater, their freedom. In the midst of the chaos, a squadron of human stealth ships, camouflaged against the backdrop of space, slipped past the vanguard's defenses. Their target was clear, the heart of the warship, the power core that fueled its devastating weaponry. The team, led by Captain Zane, knew this was a one-way mission. But they didn't hesitate. They had no choice but to succeed. "On my mark," Zane whispered, his voice tense. "We strike together. We end this." With a series of coordinated strikes, the stealth ships made their move. They tore through the shields of the vanguard with precision, their weapons cutting into the heart of the warship. The Zir commander aboard the vanguard was caught off guard, unable to react in time to stop the assault. Within moments, the ship's power core began to destabilize. On the surface of Zir, the final phase of the plan was set into motion. Ground troops, including the elite soldiers who had infiltrated the planet during the early stages of the war, launched a full-scale assault. They fought through the Zir strongholds, clashing with their alien captors in brutal hand-to-hand combat, never stopping, never giving an inch. The resistance had come full circle, they were no longer the hunted. They were the hunters. As the vanguard began to buckle under the assault, its destruction inevitable, Lyra's voice crackled over the comms. "This is it. Push forward. The Zir are broken. Let's finish this." The human fleet, now emboldened by the imminent destruction of the vanguard, redoubled their efforts. Zir warships began to retreat, their once proud fleet faltering as their greatest weapon burned. In the capital city, the last pockets of Zir resistance crumbled under the weight of humanity's fury. The streets ran red, but the Zir knew it was over. The tide had turned. Lyra stood in the command center of the rising dawn, watching the destruction unfold. The Zir capital was now a burning wreck. But it wasn't just the buildings that were falling, it was the empire itself. As the final Zir ship was destroyed, and their last bastion of resistance shattered, Lyra allowed herself a rare moment of relief. Humanity had done the impossible. They had fought back, not just for survival, but for the right to shape their own future. The galaxy would remember this day, the day humanity proved that they were not to be erased. The name human would never again be spoken in fear. It would be spoken in awe. In respect. "Let's go home," Lyra said softly, her eyes scanning the galaxy that would now be theirs to reclaim. The storm had passed. The phoenix had risen. And humanity was finally free.